the Gibson double cut no one talks about. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. A viewer of the show contacted me back in September 2023, asking if I'd be interested in a guitar. I didn't have a lot of interest in this particular model and color, but he insisted I make an offer on it, and eventually in February of 2024, we made a deal. It shipped from Canada down to the United States, and then I got busy, and here we are in early 2025, finally reviewing it. But this guitar takes us back to Gibson's Guitar of the Month series in 2008. But before we get too heavy into that, let's check out this double cut that most people don't even realize exists within Gibson's literature. This is known as the Longhorn. It was a limited edition of 1,000 of each color, so there's roughly 2,000 of them out there. And I don't think I've ever seen anybody professionally playing one of these. But it is a fascinating model because it's a little bit Gibson Les Paul as far as, having a beautiful figured maple top. You've got the roundedness of the bottom side, but where everything changes is right here. It's not really SG. It's not your usual double cut juniors or specials. It is very appropriately named the Longhorn because, well, the horns are a little bit long. And is it like a Longhorn steer? I'm not sure if that's the inspiration. If so, it belongs in my animal influence collection. But either way, I do collect the Guitar of the Month series. That ran from February of 2008 until January 2009. Yeah, isn't that funny? Even though the case and the shrouds are all plastered 2008, there was a 2009, which was the Holy Flying V. But the other models include a Reverse Explorer, a blue Longhorn that predated the Sunburst, a Shred X Explorer, as well as the Shred V, the Les Paul Push Tone, which we've reviewed, the very sweet LP 295 with the sharp Florentine cutaway, as well as the 50th anniversary Flying V and Explorers and Brimstone Burst, as well as the introduction of the Carved Top SG Diablo series in both the red gloss and silver satin finishes. Each of these models had a maximum of 1,000 made, and they had an ink stamp serial number on the back, which tells you what number you have out of the 1,000. And besides your fancy new guitar, you got the special case with the case shroud. We already looked at that. But it's built like the old Les Paul Supreme cases, where they have the really deluxe padded, bolted-on handle. The case has an extra latch than usual, and it has the beautiful crushed velvet-like interior, as well as an additional lid ribbon. They knew how to treat their limited editions right. But if you don't know, the Guitar of the Month series followed up the Guitar of the Week series, where they did nearly 50 limited edition models every week of that year. That was a bit too ambitious. They scaled it back to 12 the next time. And we've never seen anything like that ever again. And as you just saw, almost half of the Guitar of the Months were repeats with just different colors and other small changes. As far as I'm aware, at this point in time, there's nothing significantly different between the two Longhorns. It's just the color. So you get the Sunburst as well as a nice blue one. And I've always wanted the blue, and for the past year, I thought there was a blue one in this case. But what had happened is after I bought this one, somebody sold me a blue, and then I forget what happened, but that order ended up getting canceled. So here's the Sunburst one, but honestly, it looks way better in person. I'm not too disgusted by it. But now let's talk about the specs of these things. I think the reason why so many people don't like them is the fact that they come stock with EMG 85 pickups. It's rather unusual for Gibsons to get active electronics, but this series exclusively used it. But that is not all. This also has a built-in Piezo LR bag system within the bridge. So not only can you get the active tones, but you can get simulated acoustic tones. Yeah, that's right. And you got double output jacks for each. So if you want to run one to an actual dedicated acoustic amp, you can do that. Or you can get a splitter cable and run them to the same, I guess. And what if I told you these inlays are exclusive to this guitar? Now, if you're looking right here, you're probably thinking, Trogly, 70s Gibson SG, or like a 64 ES335. They've done small block inlays. Well, to that, I counter your argument with these are small block inlays. Not quite the late 90s, early 2000s Les Paul Studios and Specials. I mean, your third fret inlay is actually just a perfect square, whereas it's a little bit elongated up here for the first. They're all a little bit different on your straight up ebony fretboard, which is pretty cool. But speaking of semi-hollows, check out the binding. Gibson does not utilize 3-ply binding very often on their electric solid body guitar models. You have to get like an ES345 to get something like this, so that's unique. Then look at your peghead veneer. It's a straight up Gibson jazz box with your flower pot inlay and all your other good mother of pearl multiply binding stuff. And now what's on the back? Not too much, just your regular quick access battery compartment. But what surprises me so much about this is it's really lightweight. I was expecting this thing to be a boat anchor. I'm not sure if all of them are like this, but I've got to say, this is way more comfortable and nice feeling than I was expecting. And the neck is slim, but not too slim, so we'll get all those detailed measurements over on the workbench. So to recap everything we just said, it's a unique model with a body shape we haven't exactly seen before, with a unique electronic layout, unique inlays, unbound fretboard with bound everything else, lightweight, comfortable. It's just its own thing. So if you're looking to try something different within Gibson's lineup, maybe seek one of these things out. But to learn more about this one, let's go ahead and throw it over on the workbench to take a look at its individual parts and specs. Two hours of cleaning later, and this thing is a completely different beast. I've got to say, this might be one of the better tops I've ever seen on one of these. Their only build is AA, so I would say this is a pretty good example to document. But let's start with our pickups. As promised, it's the EMG 85 in the neck and the bridge. So not the usual 81-85 pairing, but they both date to May of 2008, as you can see right here. And being the same model, you don't have one silver and one gold. They both have the gold lettering, for those of you that like uniformity. Now if you're curious what this would look like with regular pickups, here's golden covered ones. And hey, just for fun, here's what some rails would look like. Well, I found some double black bobbin dirty fingers. This guitar seems to pull off uncovered a little bit better, in my opinion. Mainly because my brain has been trained to look for the EMG, so this is kind of similar, but not exactly the same. But ooh, this one might be my new favorite. Double creams with the white pickup rings. I think if you were going to modify one, that is definitely the way to go. Also gives you Fraley vibes. As far as zebra bobbins, I think those actually would work out pretty nicely. Here's some editing magic for you. So if any of that excites you, just remember, it's not as easy as just swapping out the pickups. This is all active electronics. You'll have to swap out your pots too. Of which I'm not really sure what this stuff is running, so we'll have to check on that on the back. As far as the cavity, looks like a long neck tenon, marked HS, likely for heritage sunburst, something like that. And here's a beautiful area to see how thick the top is. I'd say about 3/10 of an inch. So kind of similar to the CMT series from the 80s. But now moving on to the bridge pickup cavity. More of the same, but labeled LHDC for Longhorn double cut. The channel route for the wires is kind of interesting how it just runs under the top there. So they just route it away right there and then put the top on. So that aids with the wires as well as a little bit of weight relief. But moving on from the pickups, let's talk the bridge. Here it is side by side to a Gibson ABR1. Normal saddles look something similar to this. This one has brass saddles. Don't get on me about it. But the strings sit in there, and that's all a bridge basically does. Helps you set the intonation and string length of stuff. The LR Bag's under saddle bridge system does more than that. So you might notice your saddles look a little bit different. It's because each and every single one of those is actually a pickup on top of being a saddle. So if you're ever working on one of these and lift it up, you're going to see there's a hole in my guitar. And you've got a wire coming from each individual saddle running into your control cavity. Now modern bridges can simplify that with like a PCB system and just one wire going through, but this is a good old mid-2000s. So if you ever see one of these and you're particular about your gold hardware, like you can see this one's worn through and you're just thinking, oh yeah, I can easily replace the bridge, just know that that's a little bit more tricky on a model like this. But it cleaned up beautifully. It's nice and shiny again. The tailpiece has a similar story as far as the gold, but it is a full weight one. As far as the controls, it's not exactly what you would think. My initial instincts were, okay, maybe this is volume and tone for your regular humbuckers, and then this is for your piezo. No. So this is regular humbucker volume, regular humbucker tone. They put it right there so you can do volume swells, so that's cool. But this one right here is your piezo control. It has a very different feel to it. This has a lot more drag, whereas your other knobs are very fast. But we'll figure that out why on the back. But your large output jack plate actually is labeled AM. I would assume the A stands for acoustic tones and M is for magnetic. Otherwise, we can take a closer look at our binding. Just two white layers with a black like one running in between. It's so subtle, maybe not as labor intensive to do, but since it's not done a lot on electrics, it's really striking. It's one of my favorite features about this model. Now this one does have a blemish right here. However, that might not actually be wear and tear. It's not uncommon in this era for you just to find that, especially on the Midtown series. Otherwise, most of those kind of deeper scratches I was seeing over here polished out for the most part. I mean, this is not a mint condition collectible. When I bought this one, I told them I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it or not, but oh man, that top is really good on this one. The back's a bit gouged up. I'm still undecided. As far as the body measurements, it's about 9 1/4 on the upper bout and about 12 3/4 on the lower. And from neck joint to the bottom, it's about 15. It is quite slim though, about 1 3/4 inches deep. So those measurements are familiar to a Les Paul. But moving on from our mahogany body and the maple top, we've got that mahogany neck with an ebony fretboard. This is still a good couple of years before Richlight got introduced. Otherwise, I'm sure we would have saw it on this model. But those are acrylic block inlays. They are not mother of pearl. But this had a bunch of finger cheese on it and rusty frets, so I polished those up. You can definitely see some wear in the cowboy cord area, but I don't think any of that's going to affect playability. Now, if you look along the edge, you can see some minor fret sprout, but thankfully it's not sharp. I think somebody had that addressed. What you've got to be careful for is uneven drying of fretboard, and you get ledges over here. This always seemed like one of those models that would have that, but this one's so silky smooth. I love a good unbound ebony board. But I measure a 1.7 inch nut width, increasing to 211 by the 12th. It's got a first fret neck depth of 0.83, increasing to 0.98 by the 12th. Advertised as a 60 slim C neck shape. But what I like about it is it's still nice and rounded without being completely blade thin flat. Here's that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. Just a nice round C shape. As far as the neck, regular 12-inch fretboard radius. And they really could have did anything, but they stuck with their regular 24 3/4 inch scale. And now the face of our headstock. Unfortunately, there is some lacquer chipping around some of the tuners. Do I want to say that's common? Common's not necessarily the best word, but yes, it does happen. Usually it's because somebody has over-tightened the tuners, but not always. Sometimes it's just there was lacquer issues to begin with, or maybe it was over-tightened at the factory. But that is a bit of a bummer. Looks like our truss rod has definitely been used, but it's adjustable still. And then what is common is an outline on your flower pot and chalice, as well as on the main logo. That's just part of how they install them. And there's a closer look at your multiply binding along the headstock. Looks like 5-ply. And here's our truss rod cover. It's Blink. Doesn't say Longhorn or anything like that. If it wasn't for the internet, the model name might have been lost. Imagine though, instead of the flower pot, if they put a Longhorn steer on the headstock. You know, similar to the Gibson J45 that we talked about in this episode. Maybe that would have been too cheesy. But after I've had one of these in my hands, I would actually enjoy seeing a limited edition reissue of this guitar, but ditch the piezo, give you some regular humbuckers in here. Because so far, I'm digging it, but let's get it strung back up and check out the back. But here's what we're working with. So as per my previous guesses, it does look like that top one's going to be your main volume, and then down here is your tone. Those were the two that felt the same, and then that middle knob is definitely going to be your control for your LR bag system. Because that's what that looks like in here. It says LR bags, and it's a printed circuit board. But the EMGs are not a quick connect. They are hand soldered, so I'm not really sure how that all ties in with that. So if you want to go to passive pickups, it might be hire a tech type of problem. Because it looks like the pickups go down here and connect, and then they have a jumper over there, so that's opposite of usual. And then I think somehow that ties into this board, and then all these group of wirings come down to our output jacks. I thought it'd be like two completely separate systems, but I guess not. As far as the route within the body, I don't have to break out the endoscope. You can see where it ends right there. And then you do have a little bit of a cutout down here, but the route is basically just this. Then I think there's probably a center block, and it wouldn't surprise me if they also chamber it over here, but there's no way to access that cavity. So that definitely helps add to the lightness. But in modifying this, if you wanted to add more controls, definitely tons of room here. Since you got that jut in, you could probably even fit a distortion pedal in here. You think I'm joking, but I'm not. Gibson did that once with the burst driver circuit. You can check that out in this episode. One of the screws is missing on the back plate. Otherwise, it's complete. As far as how many pieces the body is, they matched it incredibly well. Had I not known it, I would have guessed one. However, get it in the light just right. You can see a small lacquer sink line where the two pieces joined. As I was telling you guys earlier, there's lots of nicks, dings and divots. So I think what I'll do with this one is I'll list it at a price that I'm okay selling it and continue looking for a slightly more clean one for the collection. But I'd really hate to sell this one and then find out it was just an unusually light example, because this thing feels like it's going to play amazingly. But somebody swapped it out for Schaller strap locks. And the other button is on the horn here. No thin binding in the cutaway on this model, just straight up binding. And a nice cherry back with some more scratches and nicks and dings on the edge. I was curious if this neck would end up being satin, because sometimes the second generation of them, they change up what kind of finishes they had. But now that it's been cleaned, I can definitely tell it left the factory gloss. Looks like we have some mild stand rash marks along the edges. Bet that'll show up under black light. But just regular Grover tuners, not locking on this model. And this dates to the 254th day of 2008, initial batch, production number 536. That's just the number stamped that particular day. It started at 500. So that's the 37th neck stamped that day. But it's limited edition number 52 out of the run of approximately 1,000. That's kind of cool. 1952, first year of the Les Paul. Personally, I have doubts that they made the full 1,000 on any of these, because if I understand their marketing correctly, it was up to 1,000. They made a good handful, sent them to the stores, and then let the pre-orders do the talking, it'd be my guess. Because I don't think I've ever seen one in like the 800s or 900s. They're all usually fairly low, so we'll have to watch that throughout the years. For now, let's see what the blacklight test will reveal. Definitely a sweat absorption area right here. Thankfully, you don't normally see that in regular lighting. However, I could definitely tell we would probably have that due to just how much gunk was kind of built up in that area. Nice and clean now. Headstock looks the way I would expect. For whatever reason, Gibson USA binding tends to glow crazily like that. And on the back, we can definitely confirm it was played quite a bit. That's where it rests against them. And again, sweat absorption area. And a little something right there. But the neck's looking good outside of, again, sweat absorption. He played that all the way up there. Some guitars you can just tell that an owner loved it so much by how much they played, as well as how well they took care of it. Like, this thing wasn't neglected dirty. It was just, hey, this guy used this as his main guitar dirty. Thankfully, no breaks, cracks, or repairs. And the suspected stand wear really isn't that bad. Now we can look along the edges, see more of the same, and our heel's looking good. We're all said and done. This Longhorn weighs 6 pounds, 14.9 ounces. Let's go ahead and hear how it sounds. All right, so that is just the EMG pickups running. I don't have any piezo elements at all, but what's kind of unique is EMGs always kind of have that active punch to it. Now, as a more traditional humbucker guy, I find I like EMGs a lot more when they're like really super ultra low, because then they're not quite as boisterous, I guess you could say. It sounds a bit more traditional. They can still get that active tone from it. And don't forget you can play around with your volume control to dial that down a bit. And you've got your tone controls too. I actually find myself quite digging that zero tone segment. Now we'll try a little bit of dirt. I'd say that sounds pretty good depending on the style of music you're going for. But now let's dial things back. This is just the piezo saddle. I've got all the magnetic pickups off, and we're on the other output jack now. If that sounds a bit too shrill, remember that's at 10. You can also roll it down to let's try like 8-ish. Let's say around 5.5 is a good spot. Considering the circumstances, I would say that sounds fairly decent. But you can also blend the magnetic pickups in with it when you have it just the piezo. So that sounds something like this. Just for fun, yes, you can put distortion on the piezo. Honestly, it sounds better than I thought it would, but there's definitely a little scratchy. I mean, I guess if you need that in your recording, you can. But another thing you could do with this is run it to 2 different amps. So the piezo is supposed to sound better if you actually run it through a dedicated electric acoustic amp. So that's an option there. But if you were trying to record 2 tracks at the same time, I would have loved a just dedicated piezo out. Because as of right now, if you were running 2 to different amps, the settings that are currently on this make it so you can't turn off the electric pickups with the piezo if you're trying to play that with the other settings. I believe anyway. Because the other option is to still run through the piezo out, but just roll that off to 0 here. That would sound like this. As compared to just being there in the first place. That's definitely not exactly the same. I would say that's a bit more mellow. So there we go, the 2008 Gibson Longhorn. What are my final thoughts on this? I seriously think Gibson could bring these back, but put regular electronics into them, and they might see some mild success. At least as a limited edition, because I think that's the biggest scare factor about these. EMG pickups, and people didn't even realize that they had the piezo elements. It kind of feels like one of the double cut Les Paul standards to play. But most importantly, it really reminds me of a Gibson Vegas. That was another Gibson double cut from around this time period that didn't see huge sales by any means. Except for this one just doesn't have the F-holes on it. So that's something else you could consider if you don't want to modify a guitar and you don't want the EMG pickups. But I actually really enjoyed playing this. But I can definitely see why some people would definitely pass on these just due to the electronics and how they're stocked. But hey, if you can get one for a good enough price, don't be too scared to modify one, because it really is a nice guitar. I can see why these don't show up for sale too often. But alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care.